The NCAA Football Rules Committee. I don't know why I said Tennessee or the SEC. The NCAA Football Rules Committee is going to gather later this month, according to Chris Vanini of The Athletic, for their annual meeting to discuss potential changes from overtime timeouts to replay challenge and more. But the topic of feigning injuries for clock management or rest purposes is atop the docket. The coaching class that created and exacerbated the problem is trying to fix it, though they don't all agree. Remember, we talked about this last month after the American Football Coaches Association convention in Charlotte. A small group of coaches suggested that a player removed from the game due to injury must sit out the rest of the drive. If the trainers and doctors clear a player to return on the drive, a team can use a timeout to buy that player back in the game if they set out at least one play. The rule would not apply to players injured by a hit that results in a penalty. According to Steve Shaw, National Coordinator of Officials and Committee Rules Editor, he said that there's a push by stakeholders in the game saying on feigning injury, something must be done. And his exact quote is, "We can't kick the can down the road once again." Now, the AFC idea was not presented to the overall group of FBS coaches who met in Charlotte, but the idea is going to be discussed by the Rules Committee. Shaw emphasized that specific idea of having to sit out a drive if you get hurt, and said it may not be the ultimate result, but the group will debate it. It's obviously it seems like a simple solution, but it's not. I'm going to give you guys a little more details, but I'm going to tell you why it's not a simple solution. But the first one, the coach is pushing back, they're lying. There is this concern for the quarterbacks. What if a quarterback has to come out of a late drive due to a cramp and their team is out of a timeout? It's a huge personnel loss. Okay, first of all, that's a lie. Because how many times do quarterbacks miss plays because they're hurt? That's just stupid. That doesn't, I mean, from a minor injury is what I'm trying to talk about. Quarterbacks miss plays because they're hurt. But how often is a quarterback knocked out of a game for a play and then comes back in? That's just ridiculous, guys. That doesn't happen. But another idea comes out of that, which is called the green dot player. One player on the field with a coach-to-player helmet communication, typically the quarterback, and one defensive player. Perhaps they would only have to sit out one play if they're clear to return. That way, the guy calling the plays could fake the injury. And someone brings up the point that, to be fair, quarterbacks aren't the ones faking injuries. They're not the problem. No one's ever accused the quarterback of faking the injury. I understand that, but the linebacker might, so you never know. Now, I will say they wouldn't want that linebacker off for a drive either that's calling the plays. So all of this is very understandable and very complex. Here's the concern for players faking injuries or addressing this. There's a belief that if you have players sit out a whole drive, they won't go down and have their injuries looked at the way they should because they don't want to be pulled out of an entire drive. Right now, for safety purposes, Davis talked about this, players are taught to go down immediately if something twinks. It's a win-win because they get to slow the offense, but also we've learned in football now there can be minor injuries that turn out to be major if you play on them. My argument is that I've seen enough on video that 90% of the players faking injuries are just faking them. They're not hurt. They're just going down to fake them. I would still coach go down if you're faking an injury. Go down if you feel a minor twinge. You'll be out a drive. You won't be out a game. I don't think it's going to be 90% of the time. It's not going to be an issue. It'll be an issue that 10% of the time where a player's a little banged up and doesn't want to miss a drive. But that's why the drive is the good compromise. They're not missing a quarter. They're not missing a half. They're not missing the rest of the game. The drive is the best compromise possible. Now, some people might bring up, well, then they could just, if a team gets inside the 20-yard line or 10-yard line, the other player will just fake an injury and they don't miss much of the drive. True, but once you get that deep into the red zone, you don't run as much tempo to begin with. So that's not going to matter as much. So honestly, I think this is actually the best way to address this, is to basically say players going down, they have to miss the whole drive. It's a sacrifice, it's a risk, but it's not as big of a risk as I think people think it's going to be. I don't think it's as bad. We'll talk about this more in a second. First, a quick message again from Ted Russell Ford.
Well, Ted, looks like you're settling right into your new space.
Affirmative, powered by the new Ford Lightning.
You know, that would be incredible for camping, tailgating. The options are unlimited. Why don't you take a little power for yourself, buddy?
Beep boop beep bop.
Get into this new 2024 Ford F-150 Power Boost for only $53,300, or get 0% for 72 months on a Ford F-150 Lightning. Come see us today at either Ted Russell Ford location, Parkside Drive, or Kingston Pike.
All right. Welcome back again. The show is brought to you by Sports Treasures, carrying over 5 million sports treasures and so much more. Follow on Facebook for the best sports memorabilia daily updates. Facebook.com/sports treasures TN. Facebook.com/sports treasures TN. Another rules change I wanted to address that they're talking about. They've actually talked about instant replay and the possibility of moving to a coach challenge model like the NFL. It's been deliberated by the committee in recent years. Coaches have generally been against it because it moves the burden of calling for replay review to them, and no-huddle offenses make it more difficult for team personnel to rewatch plays before challenge compared to the NFL. So Shaw wouldn't say whether or not it's more likely to get out of the committee, but Division II college football in 2023 added an optional coach challenge model for games where there is not a replay booth official. It's obviously something that's happened. Cited as an example, the Georgia Tech game last year in November lasted 8 overtimes, saw 3 timeouts called during the 5 periods of the 2-point shootout that began in the 3rd overtime. Multiple bowl games also went to at least 5 overtimes. Shaw said there's no interest in changing the overtime format. This is something about overtime timeouts. They're trying to debate about the overtime timeouts. But there is talk of the format, which was created in 2021, cutting down the additional timeouts to prevent the slowdown of the end of the game. I think the college football overtime is actually hot take. I don't really mind this. You guys can hate me on this all day. I think college football overtime is fine. I know people like the old model. The old model was dangerous. Players were playing way too much. I think if you can't get it done in regulation, then it's not a big deal if you have to lose off a gimmick, off a 2-point play. Sorry. I actually don't believe in overtimes. I'm just going to tell you guys something. More hot take. I think there should be ties in college football. I'm a believer in ties. I think have 2 overtimes. If you don't win the game in 2 overtimes, it's tied. I don't like this whole 2-point conversion back and forth thing anyway. So I'm for ending the game in a tie, but also I don't mind it because you didn't get it done in regulation when you should have. So I'm for ending the game in a tie. I think that's a lost art of college football. It's taken away some strategy that I thought would be epic. You know, if you got to do you play for the win? Do you play for the tie on a final drive? It would make things a lot more fun. Put it that way, particularly with standings in the college football playoff. That would be epic. Bring back ties. That's my rules change for college football in overtime. Bring back the tie, except for in the playoff. In the playoff, you have to do overtime. I get that in postseason play and in the playoff, then do the overtime rules. But until then, bring back the tie. That's what I want in college football. But I will say this rules change. The main rules change that we're talking about, the players faking injury, I think is a good compromise. It's the least bad option when there's no good options. How about that? It's the least bad option when there's no good options. I took media law in college, and one of the things we learned about the First Amendment, funny enough, is that protecting misinformation as speech is the least bad option. Nobody wants to protect misinformation as protected speech, but there's no way you could ban misinformation without banning certain types of speech that you don't want to ban because they would undercut the First Amendment. So protecting misinformation was always the least bad option. Doing this, having players sit out a drive if they go down with an injury is the least bad option in college football to address the players faking injuries. So I think that's a good way to do it.